Yo, what's going on? Hope you're having a great day, guys. I've seen other YouTubers give their thoughts on what they think of the conclusion of the fight in the final chapter, which was 236. I'm gonna just get to the point here, be straight up. I really like it, and a lot of the problems come with how fast Gojo's conclusion was and how it starts off with a flashback. Some people don't like the explanation of Sukuna's technique and all the above. Just a lot of things throughout the chapter. I think the shock of Gojo's death is probably weighing on a lot of your opinions because it did weigh on mine when I first read that chapter, don't get me wrong. But when you really sit back and think about it, or at least when I do, I'm going to speak for myself and what I personally think. Because honestly, you can dislike the chapter, you can love the chapter. Literature is subjective, and especially when it comes to how a story ends, I do believe that there is no objective, correct, best way to say that this ending was perfect. I just don't. I've read a lot of books and a lot of stories throughout my life. There are going to be some conclusions that I do not like, whereas other people love them, vice versa, and I think that's okay. And honestly, you probably should too. It's okay for people to disagree with what you believe your standards of a conclusion or a story or a fight is. I mean, if you're having trouble accepting this, then you should probably travel outside of your state, country, whatever, or just experience the real world. With that being said, let me just go through each part of the chapter. This is going to be unscripted. Me just talking like a lot of the other YouTubers did. I think it's just better and more natural to do it this way. And one last time, I do want to kind of reiterate that I don't think my opinion is the objectively correct opinion, but in this video, I kind of do want to explain why I found the chapter to be good and hopefully convince one of you guys or even more to see it in a different light. And again, this isn't scripted, just me talking. So yeah, there'll be a lot of ahs, whatevers. So the first thing people really kind of hate is that Gojo's death was quote unquote off screen. Now, in my opinion, I did think it was okay for what it was. I liked it. I think that it really displays that like death can come before you even realize it, right? It came when Gojo was at the peak of his life, when he was completely convinced that he was the strongest and untouchable. And I think that Gojo having such a quick and unceremonious death in terms of the real world does do a good job at displaying death itself. Meanwhile, his flashback reinforced all of his themes that the character was struggling with. I personally can't see a better ending for somebody who is deemed as the strongest. Getting instantly killed off like that, I personally find it to be pretty good. And honestly, with the way that Sukuna explained this space cutting technique, it doesn't seem to be something that literally is a four-dimensional instant killing blow, but it's just a work around the limitless. It's something that allows Sukuna to bypass that barrier specifically made by Satoru Gojo, and that's about it. Gojo got cut instantly. What needs to be shown there? I don't know. What do you guys want to see in that panel? If anything, we did see the cut, although it was kind of like blacked out. We saw it. But honestly, if you guys wanted to see the cut, let me know what you wanted to see because there's nothing to add there. It adds nothing to Gojo's character, his exposition, his send off. What does showing that blow do? People say it's off screen and that makes it bad, but how? How does that affect the execution of the conclusion of this battle? It just doesn't. It affects nothing. This is a storytelling, dialogue based chapter. There's no action in this. The cut would do nothing. It wouldn't add anything. As for the second elephant in the room, it's obviously the line with Nanami and Gojo not caring and whatever. I personally interpreted this as Gojo doesn't have the same mindset that most people have on missions. At least this is what Nanami believes, because you need to remember that this is something that just isn't true, regardless. Because just because Gojo doesn't argue back with Nanami here does not certify it as absolute truth or added element of truth. We know it's wrong. That's why it's stated that I believed, I thought, whichever translations you're reading, it is not stated as fact. And there have been multiple times in this story where a character was shown to be incorrect in their statements. But back to what Nanami was saying about Gojo not caring about people, whatever, however you want to interpret this. This is just to say that Gojo does not have to think about the things that other people have to think about when they go on missions. He simply walks into a building, raises his hand, calls it a day. Other sorcerers need to do 30 backflips to beat a grade 2 curse, meanwhile protecting other people around them, things like that. So this is why Nanami asks, why can't we just leave it all to Gojo? Gojo does not have to worry about these things. He doesn't have to think about these things. Why do you think that this quote was originally said after the hidden inventory arc? Because it was basically there to say that this is wrong. Chapter 236 came to wrap a bow on this tie of Nanami's character as well and say what Nanami said here shouldn't have been said. It is incorrect. We shouldn't leave everything to Gojo, because Gojo can even fail himself. Gojo and Geto were suffering the consequences of failing their first mission when Nanami said this. Although, of course, it's not like they had just failed the mission. It was some time, a year, I believe, right? Sure. This mission did traumatize the two of them, no matter how you want to spin it. They thought about this mission forever, and this failure greatly changed the trajectory of their entire lives. So when Nanami comes back and says, I believe that you didn't care about people or whatever the quote was, I can't remember it off the top of my head. Obviously, I'm not TCB scanned myself. That's just what I took it as. Gojo never had to think about, at least in the perspective of other sorcerers, Gojo never had to think about the extra things when taking on a mission, which is why Nanami had first asked, why don't we let Gojo take on everything? And of course, this quote was wrong. And Nanami and the other sorcerers kind of say that they all believe this, but it was, in the end, still incorrect. We don't know whether or not they believe that it is incorrect, or if they still believe it, but it is. But even if you think my long-winded explanation of this is incorrect, Gege uses facial expressions for a reason. Please look at Gojo's face when Nanami or Haibara says this to him, or that quote or whatever. Look at Gojo's face next to that quote. Tell me that Gojo agrees with that. Please. I mean, the picture is there for a reason, right? Not to be mean or like a smartass, but guys, come on. And for the second time, everything characters say in Jujutsu Kaisen is not correct. And Gege has made this a huge point throughout the entire fight of Gojo versus Sukuna. So for people to instantly see this chapter and then start taking every single thing in every single instance as fact, it's just mind-boggling. And in my opinion, I think it's a huge overreaction, but what can you expect at this point? I mean, this is the craziest chapter in the series. I expect overreactions. Another thing is the Gojo complimenting Sukuna when he lost. People say that there's a huge problem with this, that he's quote-unquote glazing Sukuna. Gojo went through his whole life looking for a challenge such as this. Same way how Sukuna feels about Gojo, right? These two have always thought about having a battle on this scale, having somebody who can match them. And this is why Gojo feels bad that Sukuna wasn't able to go all out, because while Gojo walks away from this battle completely satisfied, he doesn't know if Sukuna is satisfied or not. Let's make that clear. Sukuna could be satisfied, and it seems as if he actually is. However, he doesn't think that Sukuna was able to go all out. He doesn't think that Sukuna was able to give it his all. Something that he had the privilege of experiencing. It's kind of like with Saitama and Boros, right? I think it's exactly like that dichotomy. This is why Boros feels bad for Saitama at the end of their battle, because, I mean, are we going to say Boros was glazing Saitama? I don't think so. In the end, I do think it was perfectly fine for Gojo to give his praise to Sukuna for those 5-6 panels. I mean, Sukuna's the only person that can really understand Gojo, and Gojo really knows this too. He's always been isolated. He goes through this in the chapter, and I think that's what his isolation, his talk of isolation, leads up to Sukuna, because he says he was never able to understand somebody. And after saying that you can make a flower bloom and you can't ask it to understand you, he wanted to put everything into Sukuna. He wanted him to understand. Gojo didn't want to feel alone anymore. Even at his own death, he was convinced that he would be alone. And this battle with Sukuna allows Gojo to have the chance to prove himself wrong, to have some form of connection with somebody, something, albeit very twisted. No matter how you want to spin it, no matter how you want to accept it, Gojo and Sukuna feel respect for one another, and they might even be kind of cool with each other despite all the circumstances happening. Gojo and Sukuna both exist in a realm where they can only understand one another, and they kind of cherish it, as you can see in this chapter. Gojo thinks of Sukuna in his final moments, and Sukuna says that he will never forget Gojo when Gojo passes away. They have some form of high respect for one another, and no matter how you want to say it, I think it's fine. I think it's perfectly expected. I think that when you are in existence that again has been defined by your isolation, when people can only talk about your strength rather than you as a person, when your closest friend asks you if you're Gojo because you're the strongest, or if you're strongest because Gojo, when all of you is always questioned, who you are is always questioned, and then you finally have a person that can kind of see your strength as something normal, to see you as more than your strength, I think that that's valuable to both Gojo and Sukuna. And people don't really take the time to really think about this. These characters have gone through years of being defined by just being the strongest. Nobody has ever really said, well, Gojo, I like how nice he is. Well, Gojo, I like how he cleans the floor. Nobody really says these things about Gojo or Sukuna. When they're spoken about, it's only their power. And the dichotomy between these two, the dynamic, this battle, allows them to talk to somebody, to trade blows with somebody, to experience another person that is both on their level and both genuinely understand them and who they are as a person. Somebody else would likely say, well, after everything Sukuna has done, right, how can Gojo see anything positive about him? And there's just a good amount of reasons for this. Gojo's not All Might. He's no beacon of justice as much as people want to believe. He does good things for the better of society and for a better future, sure. But Gojo isn't going around preaching morals every second of the day. He tells his students, at least more than once, if I remember correctly, that there will be nobody with you when you die, right? Sorcery isn't fun in games. You have to have a couple of loose screws to be a sorcerer. He knows how messed up he is as a person. Although he is a good person, he's still screwed up. He's not this perfect beacon of justice that people want to see him as. Nor do I think Gojo really cares about morals either like that. And honestly, most of all, we all know Gojo's thing has been about being selfish. That's just what it is as a sorcerer, Jujutsu Kaisen. The whole thing has always been about being selfish to become stronger. So honestly, I really think that it's okay that Gojo was not satisfied with not making Sukuna go all out and saying that, I don't know if he could have beat him or whatever. Of course, Gojo's going to romanticize Sukuna in this fight. This fight was the closest thing he's ever had to solving his lifelong issue of isolation. Anybody would do that. That's just what it is. Gojo has stated time and time again that he does not worry for his students because he knows they will be able to figure out everything in the end. That still applies, although he came back. It still applies. And if people somehow forgot this, then reread the Shibuya incident, where Gojo was first lost for an extended amount of time. Gojo has stated that he has faith in his students. He's not worried about them. He doesn't stress about Megumi because he knows Megumi will be fine in the end. I also think that's why he doesn't feel the need to even speak about them that much in the flashback. There's nothing to be said. He knows that everything he wants out of his students will come. Gojo, this applies to Gojo. As for Sukuna, I think that's mostly headcanon on my part, but I think the love quotes do kind of reinforce this statement. However, we don't know enough about Sukuna. And again, this is chapter 236. We will have at least more than 80 more chapters than this to kind of reinforce this chapter here. Say what you want. You can react to this chapter however you want, but I'm pretty sure it will most likely be reinforced by future chapters, and you will most likely like it more in the future if you don't, or you will most likely feel different about it if you think it's perfect. Now back onto Sukuna, and not really how instantly he defeated Gojo, but more so how people think it's an ass pull. It came out of nowhere. I think that if you reread the fight, a lot of this was leading up to Sukuna doing this. Chapter 229 has Angel state that if Sukuna understood or learned something like that, his aptitude. Angel basically speaks about how if Sukuna is able to grow in this battle, Gojo will lose. It's all about Sukuna's aptitude. That is what makes him a threat. He is not a threat because he has overwhelming power, although to most sorcerers it may seem this way because he can just one-shot them. Where Sukuna really seemed to have become this monster, this unbeatable machine that just ruled the golden age of sorcerer, was most likely this trait that he had that nobody else had, which is his ability to adapt, grow, and overcome. Something that Mahito had in our present day, and we saw what Mahito became. We know what would have happened if Mahito had defeated Yuji and gone on to either leave Shibuya or continue the incident. Well, Kenjaku would have stopped them, or Yuki, but you kind of get what I'm getting at. If Mahito had been able to grow for another month or two, I don't think he would have been able to be defeated. Honestly. Unless they unsealed Gojo. But Mahito was just... The thing about Mahito was his growth rate, and this is something that is hammered into you by Angel throughout this fight. If you really look at what Angel's speaking about in this chapter, the only sorcerer from the Heian era who witnessed Sukuna in his prime, in his growth, Angel constantly says, don't let Sukuna do this. Don't let Sukuna figure out this. Don't let Sukuna see this ability or he will copy it or learn from it or something. It was all leading up to him understanding Gojo's barrier, creating a way to counter it. And even in chapter 234, I believe, when Sukuna tells Maharaga that, yo, this isn't what I want to see from you, and then Maharaga does the slash and cuts off Gojo's arm, that's what Sukuna wanted to see. He didn't want to see Maharaga turn up and fight Gojo. No, he wanted Maharaga to give him a way to defeat Gojo very efficiently, and that's what he did. When you really reread the fight, I think it does a good job at displaying that Sukuna was not fighting to just fight this whole time. Sukuna went into this battle with a game plan, and, well, he succeeded. And let's be real, did Gojo come into this battle with some sort of plan? No, he kind of just figured his way out through it, and against an opponent that's on the same level as you or stronger, that doesn't work. Kind of reminds me of Hisoka versus Crollo. If you guys saw that fight, you guys, it's the same thing here. In retrospect, you can really see that Sukuna went into this fight kind of relying on Maharaga to give him a very efficient and easier way to defeat Gojo from the start. People are going to say this means that Maharaga was absolutely needed to win. No, Sukuna was just using him to make it a lot easier, which he did. This wraps up my video and me kind of tackling a lot of the rebuttals of this chapter and the plot points that I believe people may have misunderstood. However, even if you do get it, and even if you do see how I see the chapter, then fine. Like, if you don't like it, you don't like it. There's only so much I can do to try and change your mind, and only so much that you can do to try and change my mind. We're two different people. We're going to have different opinions, and that's absolutely okay. What I don't like is the people who are saying that the chapter is objectively perfect or objectively bad. I do think it's a good chapter, and I do think that it requires a good amount of actually knowing what's going on in the story to enjoy. But to sit here and act like your opinion and what you think of the chapter is absolute, I think that's just childish. Like, especially if you're an adult going into comment sections on Twitter or on anything, just being rude and disrespectful. Like, bro, there are many other things in this world that require that sort of energy and time that you're putting into a fictional series about magic high schoolers, okay? Like, it's not that serious. Get your priorities straight, man. Anyways, with that, hopefully you enjoyed my little ramble, talk, whatever this video is, just me expressing my thoughts. Maybe some people want to hear this. I don't know. Thank you for listening and have an amazing day. Oh yeah, I hope I was able to help you see how I see the chapter. Anyways, have a great day. Peace.